Hello everyone and welcome to our group behavior change project. Our group members include Kelsey Baxter, she is from Illinois. We also have Katie Boniface, she is from Florida. Rachel Dick from Indiana. Daisy Favela, she's also from Indiana. And I'm Carly Preisner from Wisconsin. So the study that we replicated involved using a pedometer, but the original study didn't involve a pedometer. It actually used Fitbit. So it was called the Preliminary Efficacy of Prize-Based Contingency Management to Increase Activity Levels in Healthy Adults. And this was by Banna, Gibson, and Washington, 2014. It was done in 2014. And there's a lot of research out there in the field of ABA and exercise and health. So we decided to choose this study to replicate for our project. We also have the link here to the article of the original study right here. And a little summary of the original study is that it involved 11 participants originally, and all of them were healthy adults. They used the Fitbit, like I mentioned earlier, to record the number of steps that they did every day. And then they were given a prize for meeting a certain criteria of steps each day. It took place over a 3-week period, so 21 days. And the first week was a baseline, so the first baseline phase. And that's when they were actually awarded prizes for just wearing their Fitbit, so that they were reinforced for just keeping it on them all day. And then they were reinforced for that. And then the second week was the intervention phase, where they were given higher prizes, higher valuable items for keeping the Fitbit on, as well as wearing it and then meeting their criteria as well. And then those that met that criteria, they earned those prizes. Then the third and final week was a return to baseline. So they just had to wear the Fitbit and they got smaller prizes for that week.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about some of the methods that we used. So to start off with, the purpose of the original study is the researchers, they sought to find a solution to a national obesity problem. So they thought about how physical activity is operant in nature, so they sought to come up with sort of a contingency management approach to improving steps per day. So in the study, they had to wear the Fitbit, and based on certain criteria, including wearing that Fitbit, the researchers took data on the frequency of their steps and then the duration of their activity. So doing this data, they sought to increase the step level and therefore increase their health levels. So for our study, instead of a Fitbit, we all chose to use this Pinko multifunction portable outdoor sport pedometer each day. We chose this so that way we could all have the same measurement system, the same device. Some of us had Fitbits, iPhones, but we thought it would be the most simple and economical to use this pedometer. And to continue, in the original study, participants were given this activity guide. It's called the Be Active Your Way, and it's a 28-page guide. Inside the guide, there's 4 different sections based on your current activity level, such as just getting started, or if you've been doing it for a while. So in the study, the participants were given this guide. They weren't required to read it, they weren't shown how to read it or how to use it, and they weren't questioned on it. They just had it available. So we each had the link, and we were able to look through it if we chose to. And if not, then we didn't have to, as well as what was done in the study. In the original study, the participants also recorded their accurate weather data. So we chose to do this by using the Weather Channel app on our iPhones. So each day we recorded our accurate weather data, including highest and lowest temperature for the day and humidity levels and different precipitation events.
We also used a reward randomizer to select the prizes. 50% of the prizes were verbal praise and 50% were monetary type treats. We were able to change the wheel from baseline to intervention. Baseline, we used smaller monetary treats, and intervention, we used larger treats like treating ourselves to lunch. We also used an Excel spreadsheet that was shared on Google Docs. The participants shared daily step counts as well as accurate local data. The Excel spreadsheet was shared to each member with an individual tab for each of us to input our own step and weather data. We used Google Hangouts. We communicated daily through Google Hangouts texting feature. We sent pictures of our pedometers to record our steps, as well as using it to give the verbal praise if that was our prize for that day. We also used the video chat function to have weekly meetings.
Okay, so back to some of the methods of our study. The target behavior in the study was steps taken. So we chose to define this as any movement such as walking, running, skipping, jumping, while flat-footed on tiptoes. So our pedometer tracked any sort of swaying body movement, so it would also count any arm swings while sitting or standing as steps. So we took that into consideration. We wore it throughout the day, so whatever number it gave us was the number of steps it counted. We took them per day, so we defined this as when we woke up for the day and were ready to start stepping, and then at or before 11:59 p.m. of that same day. So we considered that waking hours, and then at or before 11:59 p.m. After we submit our pictures to our group members, we could reset the pedometer back to 0, so we were ready for the next day. And then, like Katie said, we collected our data and shared it on our Google document. We had tabs for our names, for the dates, for the steps, as well as the weather. So we also shared our pictures, like Katie said, through Google Hangouts. So that way we could kind of check each other and see that we were taking our steps and we were accurately recording our data. So we really used self-verification for this. In the original study, they used an ABA reversal design. So they had 1 week of baseline, 1 week of intervention, and 1 week back to baseline. In the original study, theirs lasted 7 days, while our phases lasted 5 days.
Okay, so now for baseline and the treatment phases. So in baseline 1, participants were allowed to select a prize from the name randomizer each day that they met the criteria of wearing their pedometer. So during this phase, as long as we wore the pedometer, we were able to spin the wheel regardless of how many steps we took. And Katie mentioned it earlier, but the prizes that were on the wheel, so for baseline, 50% of the prizes were verbal praise, and the other 50% were of a small monetary value. So it would be things like treating ourselves to a candy bar. And then the participants recorded their steps each day and used a percentile schedule of 3/5 each day to determine step criteria for each day in the intervention phase. So during the intervention phase, we would calculate the step criteria the night before, and then that was the goal that we had to try to meet for the next day. So for example, if we were trying to figure out the first step criteria for the first day of intervention, we would look at the previous 5 days, and then since it was a 3/5 percentile, we would put the numbers in order, and in order from smallest to greatest, and then we would pick the third highest number, which in our case would be the median since we only had 5 days. So we would pick that number, and then that number was then the step criteria for the next day. And I'll give an example of that on the next slide. So each day in intervention that a participant met their criteria, they were able to select a prize from the randomizer. So it was similar to baseline 1. Every day that we met the step criteria, we were able to spin the wheel. And the difference between the baseline prizes and the intervention prizes was that the intervention ones had a higher monetary value. So we had things like making a trip to Target, or treating ourselves to ice cream, or to lunch. And then the last 5 days of the study returned to baseline 2, where participants still wore their pedometer and recorded their data, and were able to select a prize contingent on meeting their criteria. So again, we were able to spin the wheel as long as we wore the pedometer, regardless of how many steps we took. Okay, so for this, I just used a copy of my data. So if we were trying to calculate the step criteria for the first day of intervention, the first table on the left shows the 5 days of my baseline. So to the right of that, I put the numbers in order from smallest to largest. And then the middle number, which is 4,224, that would be my step criteria for my first day of intervention. And then if I were trying to calculate the step criteria for my second day of intervention, I would no longer use my first day of baseline. I would just use the last 4 days of baseline and then my first day of intervention. And then, so I put those numbers in order from smallest to largest, and then I selected the third highest number again, so it would be the 4,365, and then that would be my step criteria for my second day. So if you see, like if you look at the second table, my first day of intervention was 4,000, I got 4,482 steps, and my step criteria was 4,224. So that day I would have been able to, or I was able to spin the wheel since I had more than what was my step criteria.
The next thing that we'll talk about is inter-observer agreement. This was not included in the original study, so we had to come up with a way to measure this throughout our study. And what we did was we ended up recording the total number of steps taken on our pedometers at the end of each day. We did this within a Google document. So once we were done walking for the day and we were ready to go to bed, we would send that into the Google document. And then we also took a picture of the pedometer showing the total number of steps of the day. And then we emailed that to another group member. Then the other group member ended up recording that number on the Google document as well. So then we could record the inter-observer agreement that day. We did that for 5 days of data, and that was for the baseline phase, the first baseline phase. We collected the inter-observer agreement data. And then we used the formula smaller count divided by larger count times 100, which was the total count inter-observer agreement percentage. And it was obtained during the 33% of the days for all the participants. So 5 out of the 15 days of the entire study, we collected the data for this. And then we all ended up having 100% inter-observer agreement for our study. So all of us had 100% across the board, and we all had an average IOA of 100% total then. So that was IOA.
Okay, so then we looked at treatment integrity, and this was a little tricky to figure out at first, but it was obtained by us submitting our pedometer steps each day. So daily we took a picture of our pedometers and how many steps we took, and then we sent a picture to each one of us, and then those pictures were then kept tracked in an account. We also were observed indirectly, so we had to rely on our devices for this, and we also had to rely on our honesty of the uses with the devices. For social validity, we were asked to complete a survey based on the quality and effects of the study compared to our health. So the survey included questions based on steps and how it compared to the overall health, just like in the study. So for our graphs, you'll notice we did the weather as well as our steps and the date. For the weather, we had an average of about 84 degrees. 3 of us were in pretty close proximity of each other. 1 of us lives in Florida, so the weather was pretty hot there. We took a maximum and a minimum temperature daily. We also did the humidity and precipitation and precipitation events to see how that would have an effect on our overall study. And then we each did an average and range for our baseline, intervention, and then our baseline again. For the treatment, in the intervention to meet our criteria, I think some of us, it was easier to meet, especially in the baseline when you were just getting started and getting used to using it. And then for me, meeting the criteria was a lot easier, but my steps weren't as high as I wanted them to be because I kept getting verbal praise. So that was that one. And then here we just took our graphs. We had the step criteria in the middle of each of our graphs, and then we did the baseline, intervention, baseline. So we took data for a total of 15 days, and then steps for each of those days.
Okay, so here is my graph. So we have our session dates as well as the days that they coincide with and our number of steps taken. For me, in the intervention phase, I did find I had a hard time meeting my criteria, as you can see on the graph on the next slide. The weather was a little bit hotter average this week than in other weeks. It was a typical work week for me, so I'm not sure why my steps were pretty low. In baseline, when we spun the prize wheel, I did also get a lot of verbal praise, so it's likely that wasn't super motivating for me. And then my graph will be on the next slide. So you can see where my step criteria and my actual steps don't necessarily match up. I did only meet my step criteria 2 days of my intervention phase. And then you can see both my baselines are a little bit higher than my intervention.
Okay, for mine, Rachel and I live in the same area, so our weather is basically, it's the same thing. But like she said, so during intervention, it rained like a lot, but that didn't really affect my data at all. I mean, most of my steps, so actually the majority of my steps were at work and it was inside, so the rain didn't, the humidity, the high temperatures didn't have any effect on whether I met my steps or not. And you'll see it on my graph on the next slide, but like, so my average for baseline was, for both of my baselines, was lower than for my intervention. So I met my criteria on all of the days, but I also got a lot of trips to Target and treating myself to lunch. So that definitely had, I think that definitely had a lot to do with it. So on my graph, you can see during the intervention that there was one day, the third day of intervention, where it looks like it's pretty close, but I actually did meet my step criteria for all of the days. And then during my baseline, the baseline 2, it actually looks like it's going down. So I definitely think that the prizes, the fact that I didn't get as much verbal praise when I spun the wheel, I definitely think that had something to do with it.
So here is my weather graph here. It did rain a little bit, not too often, kind of off and on each day. And the weather varied in temperature. Sometimes it was up to 82, 83. It was low too as well, like 65 sometimes. And just like Daisy, I work inside, so I really don't feel like it made a difference in the amount of steps that I took each day, the weather. But really, it didn't really change my steps. And then the next graph will show my data here. So my steps criteria is right there in the middle by the intervention there, and I didn't meet my criteria one day out of those 5 days throughout the intervention. And I thought it was interesting because I actually spun the wheel and got ice cream 2 days in a row. So I was able to treat myself to ice cream 2 times in a row. So I felt like I was kind of satiated with ice cream, and I was not looking forward to another day of ice cream after that. But I did spin and get verbal praise that 3rd day, so that might have been part of my issue with the steps there. But other than that, I felt like, yeah, I met my criteria almost every day. And then when I went back to baseline, I did see a little bit of a decrease there, but I felt like it had a lot to do with what day of the week it was, and if it was a weekday or weekend, because during the weekends I do a lot of homework and I do a lot less active stuff throughout the weekend, so that might have played a factor as well. So that's my graph right there.
So I am the person that has not been working and lives in Florida, so I was able to meet my criteria every day since I had more freedom to take steps. Even though it rained every day, it's Florida, so it only rains for like a half hour every day. So I met my criteria every day, and I also got a lot of going to Target and treating myself to lunch, which was nice since I was able to do that. And so my baseline started out slow, and I met my steps during the intervention, and then my return to baseline continued with kind of higher steps because I had the ability to walk around more than the other girls that were working. In our replication, or in the original study, 4 of the 11 participants showed improved step counts during the intervention. In our replication, 2 of the 5 participants, myself and Daisy, met the criteria for 5 days. In the intervention phase, 1 participant met the criteria 4 of the 5 days, that was Carly, and 2 met the criteria 3 of the 5 days, which was Rachel and Kelsey.
Okay, so some of the limitations that we found were, so the first one, so all participants found that the Pinko pedometer produced inaccurate readings of the daily step count. And, okay, so we chose the Pinko because, well, it was cheap. And we all had, some of us had like an Apple Watch, or some of us had Fitbits, but we didn't all have the same thing. So we thought it would be the best option for us to be able to have the same measurement system. And so not all of us are able to have our phones with us during work, but we did try it a few times just to see how accurate the pedometers were in reading our steps. And we found that they're not very accurate at all. Our phones, for the most part, were a lot more accurate, and there is a huge difference between the 2 readings. And also, participants in the study were eligible to draw and earn prizes of monetary value. So in the study, the participants had, so during baseline, there was a monetary value of about $5, and then in the intervention phase, they had a monetary value of $15. And when we did it, we couldn't just be handing out money. So we had, when we talked about our prizes, we all sat down and we talked about things that would be motivating for us and things that related more to us instead of just actual items or things that we could just buy. So that's something that was different. I mean, we live in different areas in different states, so that was something that we had to make work for us. And also, there were only 5 participants in our study, but the original study had 11 participants. So that was, I mean, ideally, if we wanted to replicate the study, we would need at least 11, or if not more, participants to be able to see if we kind of, replicated or got the same results as them. And also, we did have less time to conduct the research. Which I guess is the next point. So their phases lasted, in the study, they lasted 7 days. And when we replicated it, we only had 5 days in each of our phases. And that may have something to do with it. Maybe we needed to wait longer for us to get a more steady baseline before we moved on to intervention. So that could have had something to do with our results. And lastly, the Pinko pedometers only counted the number of steps that we took. However, in the study, the Fitbits recorded activity duration and bursts of activity. So in the study, the participants they would go in and they had like stations where they would plug in their Fitbit, and then all of their information would automatically upload, and it would show like what percentage of the day they were actually active, or how many bursts of activity they had throughout the day. And well, we didn't we didn't have that. Our pedometers only recorded how many steps we took, and then that was it. So that was the only data that we actually had. So we actually missed out on some of the data for when we replicated the study.